we're going to get into the more substantive information now and talk about several things. And I want to start off before we do anything is there's three things you need to know before we settle in for our Zoom. One, we did nothing wrong.
Amen.
You did nothing wrong. Atlanta Communities did nothing wrong, and the real estate industry did nothing wrong. However, this is where we find ourselves because you can be in trouble having done nothing wrong. Two, Atlanta Communities always operates on the principle that we take care of the people we serve, you, and take care of the company, us. I've been here with Judson Adamson, our CEO and founder, for 27 years, first as an agent, then a broker, and now president. Our commitment to you and the company is first and foremost then and now. None of that's changing. None of that's changed. We are here for you just like we've always been. And three, no one knows. No one, not me, not Judson, not Tony, not your brokers, not our staff teams, not your colleagues, not your peers, not your prospects, not your customers, not your clients, not your buyers, not your sellers, not the general public, and certainly not the media. We are here today to have a conversation with all of you. If you think there'll be some sort of earth-shattering revelation, you'll probably be disappointed. It will be just plain old, down-to-earth perspective from us. Wanted to give you that truth in advertising, so to speak, because it's just us having a conversation. No one knows. We're not sure what's going to happen.
And unfortunately, the media is, doing their clickbait articles. NAR actually responded to President Biden regarding some misinformation that he spoke about the commission lawsuit. And that's one. Sure. One thing that I want to make sure that everybody is aware of, I think I saw it shared on our Facebook group, but if you want the straight information from NAR, the web address is facts, FACTS.realtor. I've got those documents up right now. They've got some great ones out there. We've got the settlement fact sheet. We've got the FAQ as to how it affects realtors and brokers. And then we've got the financing aspect as well. And we're going to talk about those two different, there's really two big practice changes in regards to this proposed settlement that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But again, facts.realtor.
All right. Yeah, and I'm not sure where you're going next, so you might as well throw it out there, and then I can say, okay, let's hold on that and do this first. So you go ahead first.
Okay. Well, we know why we're here today. We're here today to discuss the potential ramifications of the proposed settlement. I think everybody needs to keep that in mind. This is a proposed settlement. This has not been approved by the judge in the case yet. And so we've got a little, I think he has to decide by the end of this month, or maybe
it hasn't. Well, actually, it hasn't even been submitted to the court yet. The plaintiff's attorneys and NAR have hammered out this agreement, which in principle means that the judge and the court should accept it. However, it hadn't even been presented yet, and it should be probably next week. It'll be submitted to the court. And that's something, again, that the media, as if it's a done deal, but truth of the matter is it hasn't been submitted to the court.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So what are really breaks down to the proposed settlement? What have the parties agreed to? Well, NAR. Oh, yes.
Hang on, sorry. Yeah. Let me go over the history a little bit, because I think that's an important part of the equation, and probably what most people don't know. This has been going on. The Department of Justice has been involved with the real estate industry for 30 years. Starting in about 2005, they wanted us to change our ways to some extent. As a member of the National Association of Realtors, they hammered out an agreement in 2008 that was a 10-year agreement, which expired in 2018. Then they had further discussions. In 2019, the first significant commission lawsuit was filed seeking class action status. 2020 rolled around, and we know what happened then, COVID. And 2021 came around, and the Department of Justice and the National Association of Realtors were still batting around what they were going to do, and they had not hammered out a new agreement because In the summer of 2021, the Department of Justice pulled out of the settlement agreement. So they had agreed in principle to the settlement. And then all of a sudden in 2021, they said, nope, we're not going to do it. And they backed out. I think this is another significant thing that people need to know about the history of this is that in the fall/winter of 2021, actually in December of 2021, our senator from Georgia, the esteemed Johnny Isakson, passed away. And the reason that I think that's an underlying thing that people don't realize is Johnny Isakson was an absolute champion, not only for the real estate profession here in Georgia, but nationally, and believed that real estate was an important part of the American dream and was an important part of what happens in the United States in general. And he passed away. So then we roll into COVID and the years after, and it's kind of been since COVID, the perfect storm. We had inventory shortage, run-ups in value. It was easy on sellers, hard on buyers, and then rates jumped and the market stalled. So that lull gave these commission lawsuits traction because things were kind of on pause and they seized the opportunity to move forward with them. And in many respects, after the party, the hangover set in. So that's how we got here. It's been a long road. It hasn't just happened in the last couple of years. It's been going on pretty much the whole time I've been here. And the National Association of Realtors, along with the real estate profession in general, because I don't want to just lump it all into NAR, has been under scrutiny by the Department of Justice for years because they didn't like us. And that's just where we are. Even if you're not a realtor, you're affected by what happens with the Department of Justice and the real estate industry in general. Okay, so now.
And one other point I would add to that is while these settlement negotiations were going on, the webinar was on Tuesday afternoon. They were, I don't want to use the word speculating, but they were fairly confident that while these settlement agreements were taking place, that they were keeping the Department of Justice in the know because the Department of Justice has their nose all over this.
And so does the federal, and for those of you not in the know, so does the Federal Reserve. They've now weighed in, and this is unprecedented territory in the sense that that's never happened. Even the Federal Reserve has never said, hey, real estate people get paid too much. Yes, and sir. How we get paid. They've never done any of that until now.
So why did NAR enter into this settlement agreement? And I'm just going to go ahead and read from the fact sheet. NAR has tried to consistently reach a resolution, and they wanted to reduce the significant strain on the members and provide a path forward for the industry. And they wanted to secure a release to as many of their members, associations, and MLSs that we could, and also preserve the choices consumers have regarding real estate services and compensation. They believe that that proposed settlement handles both of those goals and provides a path to move forward. So as far as what we know are the released parties from the settlement, and for anybody that would care to read that settlement, it is 108 pages and it is on facts.realtor. Mark and I have both read it. But according to what we know and according to what is in the settlement, more than 1 million realtors are released as a part of this settlement. And from our understanding, that is going to include all of our realtors and associate brokers that are hang their license with Atlantic Communities. It does not release firms that closed over $2 billion in sales volume in the calendar year of 2022. Atlantic Communities closed 4.1 billion in 2022. So we are working with our counsel to explore our options on that. We would also say that all of the MLSs have been released as well, according to the NAR settlement. And that's where we are. NAR has agreed to pay $418 million over 4 years as part of the proposed settlement.
Tony, how many minutes or hours or days did you spend discussing the proposed settlement with NAR before they did it. Do you know how many Judson did or anything?
I do, sir. 0.
Right. And that's my point, is because just like it caught everyone off guard that they released this on Friday, no one knew that this was in the works. And that is not uncommon. So you can point the cannon towards NAR and you can badmouth them or anything and all. This is how lawsuits work. And I'm not defending NAR one in any way, shape, or form. It's just that they, like any entity, have to do what they believe is in their own best self-interest. And hopefully, which I think they potentially accomplished that to some extent, their members. And that's the reality of it. They didn't call and say, Tony, what do you think? Judson, what do you think? Mark, what do you think? They didn't do any of that. And the reason for that is probably very complicated. And one of the things that you have to understand, that in major lawsuits, and this is certainly, if you think about the national scope of this, and including here in Georgia, major lawsuits, one of the things you have to figure out is where is EXIT and where is the exit, because you got to get out of it, because nobody wins in lawsuits. Even the winners don't win in lawsuits per se, because it's expensive. And the one thing that you never want to spend money on as an entity, as a company or anything, is attorney fees.
Correct.
It's expensive. And it's mind numbing, because you're spending money for things that are so intangible that you at the end of the day, you get a receipt. That's it. That's all you got,
Right.
Yeah. So it sucks, actually.
It does. So do we want to talk about the 2 big practice changes and then go into some of the questions that we received from the broker?
Well, yeah, I think so. And I've got some more information here too as well. So you go first, and then we'll add or subtract or do whatever we need to do.
Sounds good. So the 2 big practice changes that are proposed to go in effect mid-July, and I do want to state that proposed date of mid-July, in one of the webinars that I was on, the gentleman stated that he sees that as a moving date. It may not be as soon as mid-July. It may be a little further out than mid-July, because if you think about all the things that have to change, the MLSs need to change their fields. The state associations need to update their forms. So there's a lot that has to happen before these practice changes can go into effect. And it really comes down to 2 practice changes, is that NAR is going to require a buyer-broker agreement prior to showing buyer's property. And quite frankly, at Atlantic Communities, we've wanted you to do that for years. Since I've been here, that's been, we require a buyer brokerage agreement, and buyer brokerage agreements have been around in Georgia for quite some time. So that change isn't, it's not devastating. This is how we should be operating. We should get that buyer broker agreement. Do you have anything to add before I talk about
Yeah,
this?
I do. I had the pleasure, I think it was a pleasure, of being on a Florida Zoom where I was on a panel the other day, because they wanted a perspective from Georgia, because in Florida, it's a transaction state and they don't have buyer brokerage agreements. And so they're now having to morph into that. And quite frankly, they think in Florida that we think the sky is falling, they really do, because they've never done that. They've always been just transactional people and transactional. And now they're going to have to be representing buyers through a written agreement. And it's a big deal. It's substantial in Florida, because they don't even have the forms. I mean, they got to draft the forms and make them available and teach on the forms. And we've been way ahead of that, because we went to buyer brokerage probably, if memory serves me correctly, 1997 or 1998, sometime right after I got into general brokerage from the builder industry.
Interesting how they do it. Every state's different in how they've got it set up. So that Florida case, they've got some work to do in order to get their forms ready to go. So the second big practice change as part of this proposed settlement, and this was one that I think we got 3 questions on from our brokers, is that offers of compensation to buyer brokers will no longer be offered in the MLS. Now, we've got the question saying, well, can I upload my commission agreement to the doc section of the listing in FMLS or Georgia MLS? And in reading the settlement, and that was one of we got that question in, I think, 3 times. And the response is that the proposed settlement explicitly states that no offers of compensation can be made on the MLS. So what does that mean for us as practitioners? Well, for those that deal in the commercial space, it's been this way for as many commercial people as I've spoken to. It's been this way forever. You, as the buyer's agent, will need to contact the listing agent to find out if the seller is offering any compensation, whether it's a call, whether it's an email, whether it's a text. But you're going to have to take that extra step because that field will be removed from the MLSs as part of the proposed settlement.
And while that's extremely nerve-wracking, because I can already see people out there shaking their heads, even though I can't really see them, but I can already see them out there shaking their heads and all this because they're going to say, well, they don't even answer their phone now and all. I'm telling you, in the future, if the seller's going to agree to pay commission to the buy side, they need to be answering their phones and communicating with potential buyer agents, because that's the way they're going to communicate that the seller is going to get paid. And further, as it relates to that, is that we are assuming that all sellers that we're currently dealing with are going to want to offer compensation. And again, we don't know that because we don't even know who our future sellers are. And while I would hope that many sellers will agree to, in principle, offer compensation to the buy side, some won't. Some won't. And so no one knows how that part of the change is going to play out. Although, again, commission's not outlawed, compensation's not outlawed, fees are not outlawed, which means that we'll still be able to get paid by the people we work for, whether it be seller or buyer.
Yes, sir. We've got 2 questions that have come in here. One was actually more of a statement here. I've got a couple of others coming in, but let's, again, if we can hold off on all the questions until we get through our broker questions, because we want to communicate our message here. But let's, we had somebody say that it was 1996 when the buyer broker came into effect here in Georgia. And on this topic that you were just talking about, Mark, it was, how does this work when the listing agent is less than communicable, is how it was stated. But
I think they're going to have to learn to be communicators. I mean, I really do. I think that's one of the substantive changes. And if you're on the listing side, and if you're typically a listing agent, I'm telling you, you're going to have to be really available to answer those questions if the seller is paying or offering commission to the buy side. It's just a change in how we do business. It can be as easy as I use a real telephone. I use an Android, not an iPhone, but in my Android, I'm able to create my own text responses. And one of the things that I would do if I were in your case, if I was a listing agent and the seller was paying commission to the buy side, is I would make a standard text that would then, anytime anybody texted me, I could just fire out and say, if you're talking about 1234 Main Street, the answer is sellers will consider compensation. I mean, it's just a change in how we do things.
Correct. Thank you. Back to one of the questions that came in from our brokers, and I know we've got some things piling up in the Q&A, folks. If you can just bear with us while we get through some of the ones that were brought in from our brokers, we will address as many of yours as we can. But this is a good one that's along that topic, Mark. And the question is, my sellers are calling me and asking me to renegotiate my fees. My answer to that would be that you've got to discuss the potential ramifications of not offering buyer broker compensation with them. Anything to add on that, Mark?
I mean, again, I think you need to tell them, one of the things that everybody seems to want that I'm not sure how to get, because I don't really think it exists, and that is, can can you give me a script on what to say to people and what to say to sellers and what to say to buyers? And the overall answer is, I don't think so. I think you need to educate yourself as much as you can so that whatever you want to say will be conversational. But I think the most important part of that, and this is where the industry needs to pivot, is that guess who we need to listen to? The people we serve. And we need to listen to what they have to say, and we need to inform them about what's going on in the industry as it relates to these lawsuits and the proposed settlements, et cetera. And then we can have conversations with them because, again, I think they won't. If they're a seller, they want to sell the house. That's first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to do that as expediently as possible. Some of them want to maximize what they make, and other ones want to move on with the rest of their lives. And once we have those conversations with the seller, we'll be able to help determine what path is best for them. And it's the same thing about them wanting to renegotiate their things. You know what? If they want to, then you have to figure out, will you be open to an offer that includes compensation for the buy side? We cannot predict what sellers and buyers will say or do. We can only hone our craft so that we feel confident in having those conversations with people. I was about as nervous as I've ever been in my entire life to be on this call today because it's the most important thing that's happened to me since I've been president of Atlanta Communities. And yet I have the confidence that I'm going to deliver the information in the best way I know how to as many of you that are receptive to the message. That's all I can do.
Yes,
after that, after the words come out of my mouth and they get recorded, even more so, I don't have any way to put them back in. I can only say what I think. And the good news is I do that habitually. And the same thing with you. I can tell you how vulnerable I am sitting here in this chair right now, having these conversations, which is I don't know the answer to all those questions. I don't know what you say to a seller that wants to renegotiate, but I can tell you what, I'm going to have a conversation and I'm going to say, so why do you want to renegotiate? And then they're going to tell me. And then I'm going to say, well, what makes you want to do that? And then they're going to tell me. And then I'm going to say, so why do you think that benefits you? And they're going to tell me. It's just that simple. It's not complicated.
Agree. Thank you. The next big question that I know that is probably on everybody's mind, it came up at least 3 times in our questions that we posed to our brokers. Will we have to stay a member of NAR? And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you what I told you when Mark and I were doing our buyer and seller conversations around the company. We are investigating and exploring all of our options at this time. We will be sure to let you know if we decide to make a change. But at this time, we are staying the course. Your leadership team, I can tell you, we have all the documentation and things ready to go if we decide to leave or have a non-realtor firm. And that's it. That's where we are right now. So we haven't, the decision has not been made. Do we have the pieces in place if we need to pivot? Yes, we do.
Again, back to number 2, right off the bat. Atlanta Communities always operates on the principle that we take care of the people we serve, you, and take care of the company, us. That's exactly what we're going to continue to do. We are going to when we made a decision to leave RE/MAX, you talk about a tough decision at that particular point in time. That was in 2009, that was a tough decision. We had been with RE/MAX all those years and we had to make a decision. Why did we make the decision? Because the industry was changing and we needed to make a change that RE/MAX, quite frankly, with their framework, wouldn't allow us to do and wouldn't allow us to pivot to be able to serve all of you better. So we stepped out there thanks to Judson's leadership, and I can remember all those conversations and how difficult they were. And we arrived at the best decision for us, much to our peers thinking that we were going under because we did it. And guess what? They were wrong and we were right. And we will continue to try to make the best decisions. But you're, I'm going to call the word, I'm going to use the word anarchy. We, we hear you loud and clear. There are many things that we don't like about, potentially the proposed settlement or any number of things. And unfortunately, we have to play the hand we've been dealt, and we have to do it responsibly, and we have to keep our cards close to our chest, and we have to make sure that we're doing what's in the best interest of all of you and the company. And to that end, I promise you we're going to do that. I promise you. And it may not be everything you like, because already for many of you, the drumbeat has been on for years for you to quit paying realtor dues. I know. And in many cases, I understand fully. But the real benefit for us has been the Georgia Association of Realtors. And I can tell you right now, because of the changes that Seth Weissman and the Forms Committee have done to the Georgia Association of Realtors forms over the past 4 years, since the beginning, even longer than that, 5 years, since the first commission lawsuit was filed, have been tremendous in adapting what we do and protecting us as an industry. They have done a stellar job. NAR, not so much. Quite frankly, not so much.
I agree. I agree. Well said. All right, so we got that big question out of the way. Next one that came through a few times was regarding what's going to happen to FMLS fees if it's not disclosed as a co-op in the listing. What happens to the FMLS fee on the buyer side if we're not making any commission? And to the best of our knowledge, and FMLS has a statement on their website that FMLS fees, to the best of our knowledge, are not going to change. They are monitoring the situation. FMLS was not named. They are privately held MLS. They are not affiliated with NAR. So they are not necessarily in this proposed settlement, and they haven't been sued, hasn't been named in a lawsuit. FMLS has not, but they and their legal team are monitoring the case very closely, and they stated that they will let their members know should they need to pivot with any type of rule change. And so again, to the best of our knowledge, FMLS fees are not going to change as we know it.
And to that end, I think it's important to, again, give some context to what's going on, because so many of our people have been in real estate a relatively short time compared to so many of our other people. And one of the things that makes Georgia unique, and specifically Metro Atlanta unique, is I'm going to call it like it is. For sure, the pioneer that for a long time many of us despised in the industry, and that would be Rhonda Duffy. And Duffy Realty petitioned the Georgia Real Estate Commission to change the way they did the change laws, as a matter of fact, and changed rules and regulations from the Georgia Real Estate Commission, because they wanted to have discount services and discount fees, and they wanted us to be able to talk directly to sellers and all these anything. And you know what? At that particular point in time, nobody really liked it, but I can tell you that unknowingly that paved the way for a lot of the good things that we have been doing for a long time here in Georgia, because we had already made changes.
Yes, sir.
I mean, it's just true. It's true.
Okay, here's a
wait. One more thing, and that is we don't control FMLS. Years ago, they used to base it on commission, and then they changed it to sales price. We don't know what might be in store for them. We just don't know.
Yeah,
and I don't know that we're going to be doing a whole lot of free transactions either.
Other than that small statement that they put on their website, that was all that we've heard from FMLS in that regard. I did reach out to my former colleagues at Georgia MLS to see if they were going to make a statement, because they are NAR affiliated and owned by the DeKalb Association of Realtors. And they are waiting for their executive team and board of directors meetings here later this weekend into next week before they come out with a statement regarding the proposed settlement. So we'll hear from them after their meetings. All right, Mr. Hall, next one that we have on our list from our broker questions is how do we address buyer paid commission or buyer paid commissions in the buyer brokerage agreement for VA buyers when VA guidelines can't require the buyer to pay commission? We've got a special stip, don't we?
We do have a special step for that.
We
And the time to talk to VA buyers about that special step is when you are doing the buyer brokerage agreement with the VA buyers, which hopefully is earlier in the transaction cycle than it has been previously. And that is so that the VA buyer fully understands that they are prohibited from paying your fees if the seller will not pay their fees. And because of that, the Georgia Association of Realtors has devised a special step. And I would, if I were representing a VA buyer, and I'm a vet, of course, I would then include that and maybe even include the special step in the buyer brokerage agreement so that they know what they're agreeing to, that they're going to ask the seller to pay the buyer agent fees.
Yes, sir. And that is,
and I also think, I know VA is also looking at that because they understand that now that's potentially an issue as it relates to the national real estate market.
yes, sir. And that is special stip number 619, special stip number 619. And the GAR Forms Committee also added another special stipulation number 620, where the buyer can request the seller to pay the buyer broker commission. And so those two special steps the Forms Committee's put out there for us here very recently. It was actually in the form changes for this year. So special step 619 is for a VA loan, and special step number 620 is where the buyer requests the seller to pay the buyer broker commission.
Yeah, and historically we could not because of Georgia Real Estate Commission rules and regulations and Georgia license law. We could not use the purchase and sale agreement to negotiate commission. And the difference is, under those circumstances, we were negotiating it for our benefit. And in these circumstances, you're negotiating it for the benefit of the buyer, which means, because I want to make sure that everybody's clear on this, you can't, I've seen out there on rocks, well, I'll just include that step in every offer I make. And the truth is, you can't do that unless the buyer says, I want you to include this, because the buyer is the one benefiting from that, not you. Obviously, you're benefiting from it too if the seller agrees to pay the fee. However, the buyer has to be the one in control of that process and give authorization for it to be included. Big difference. And I can't say it enough. The buyer will drive that.
All right. So what, Mark, what do you have on your list that you wanted to pivot to? We've addressed most of the ones off of our broker list as how we're flowing here this morning.
All right. Give me a second. This is why you never see me use notes. This is why I always talk off the top of my head, because it's hard for me to read, and I scribble out notes that look like this in Pig Latin or something.
While you take a look there, let me just go to
Sure.
some ones that have come through on the Q&A, because some of those have been answered live here. Can we choose to put the instructions to closing attorney with the attached disclosures? No, per the settlement agreement, no offers of compensation on the MLS. And so,
but I do think it's important to say right now that from what we understand, other places, so in other words, other internet sites, etc., can have offers of compensation, just not through the MLS. So we interpret that, or maybe others have interpreted it and published it. I'm not sure who was the originating people for that. But for instance, on websites, you can publish that. On company websites, you could publish that sellers paying a buyer broker fee. Yeah. It may be part of syndication. It may be a field that's still in there that is syndicated, but not part of. We don't know. That's the bottom line. Is we don't know.
I know we'll be able to have that on our website, and I just got a ping from our corporate training director, Michelle Davis, and she said that KB core listings can be edited. So thank you, Michelle. Again, this offer of compensation is strictly involving offers of compensation on the MLS. And that was another question that we did get regarding showing time. Are we going to be able to offer seller compensation in showing time? Being that showing time is integrated with the MLS, yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
But I can tell you, since it's owned by Zillow, remember Zillow? Everybody, Zillow, that the big people, the Zillow people, Zillow owns showing time. And so I can tell you that if it's able to be offered, shown in showing time somehow, it will be.
All right, thank you. We got that one answered live, and then we had another one came in about FMLS not being a part of the proposed change because they're privately owned, and we answered that one live as well.
Well, but I think we need to amplify on that, and that is, I think as goes most of the industry, so goes the rest of the industry, because you don't want to be the one that's the odd person out, because then you become an even bigger target. So if the industry agrees to all these things, I don't think you're necessarily going to see a one-off or a two-off, because it brings too much scrutiny to them. There are going to be people out there that are monitoring that, so to speak.
Of course.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I kind of go through these a little bit, Mark. Are you at a place where you had
Yeah.
Okay. Fire away.
All right. So on the Florida call, those of you who may remember Christian Ross, he was an attorney with Campbell and Brannon, and he moved back to Florida to go to work for his dad's title company and his dad's law firm. And they invited me to be on that Florida call as a panelist. And one of the people that were on that call said that, and I'm just going to go down what I wrote down, that the news is wrong. That they are misreporting any number of things, at the end of 5% and 6% commission, all these other things, and just know that the news is wrong. And I've seen this, and if I ruffle feathers again, that's not my intention, but I want to tell you it from our perspective is, if something's going wrong and people are pointing things at you, the one thing you may not want to do is jump right out there and get right into the fray. Because once you put something out there, you can't take it back, nor can you shy away from it. And what I've seen is people out there that are addressing to their Facebook group or their Instagram group and stuff about how wrong all these other things are. In other words, trying to dispel the news reports, etc. And while you would think that would be a great strategy, what about the one person that then just goes on a rant and says you've been overpaid for years and all these other things? I would refrain from doing that. And that doesn't mean I want you to put your head in the sand. I've also seen a few people go out there and say, if you want to talk anything about real estate, I'm happy to grab a cup of coffee with you and go sit down and do it. And I think that's a much better approach. In other words, me think you do protest too much about what the changes are and about how good I am and how much work I do and all these other things. And I think it could go the wrong way. It could go the wrong way. So the news is wrong. There probably will be no home prices falling due to the settlement. And that's because they want to, part of their narrative is that home prices will start falling by 5 or 6% at least, at a minimum. You know what? Home prices may start to fall because buyer demand is off a little bit because rates are higher. They're not going to be falling because of commission. The settlement offer has not been filed yet with the court and will probably be next week. It's 108. Is that right? 108 pages?
Correct.
Right. 108 pages. The class action law attorney that was talking to the Miami Association of Realtors said that the lawsuits will be mostly over, and that what they emphasized on that call was the term mostly over. Do not expect much change until summer. Court will likely approve the settlement agreement as presented with no modifications. The fourth quarter will start to see some cases be dismissed. There is no proposed change to the NAR's clear cooperation policy. And I think that's probably because the clear cooperation policy didn't set commission rates or anything. It just said that we would cooperate with each other much like we had done before. I'm not really sure how that figures into it, but that was one of the points. No co-broke commission in the MLS, but can be on company websites. Offers of compensation from sellers to buyers agents is still okay. That brokerages need to implement antitrust policies and procedures. Some forms will likely change, in other words, state forms or real estate forms, and that August the 1st is or later is probably a more realistic target date.
Excellent. Thank you. I've got a couple ones that have come through here. Who will update existing listings with buyer broker commissions in the listing when this goes into effect? Will we need to go in and do that, or will the MLSs automatically omit that? My understanding is that they will just omit that field automatically. And so you won't see that anymore. So to the best of my knowledge, we're not going to have to go in and change. I think we've got roughly 1,000 active listings right now. We're not going to have to go in and manually update those. They will just hide those fields for us. And they will, of course, keep us posted as they make those changes. And then I got another really a comment here, and thank you. I highly recommend texting or emailing the agent, the listing agent, for a written response versus a verbal as to whether or not the seller is going to pay commission. I agree 100%. That is a great point taken. We've talked about FMLS. We've already answered that one. Let's see here, Mr. Hall. They're starting to pile up a little bit, and I've got to kind of read through them on the fly here to see how we can best handle this. Let's see.
Well, I can fill the void while you're reading through those if you want me to. So yesterday I was on a Zoom, and it identified what the problem was, the opportunity that lied within the problem, and what to do to seize the opportunity. And the problem was identified as there was a vacuum, there was a black hole that we created as an industry. And that black hole is this, which is people, the general public, doesn't know what a good buyer's agent is. And consequently, the general public doesn't know what a bad buyer agent is, but they do know several agents. In fact, most people, if there were a couple, they knew about, I want to say the number was something like 10 or 11 agents between the two of them. So they knew agents, but they really didn't know who was good and bad. And this went on to say that in their polling of people, and depending on how they ask the question, that in general, the public was not opposed to how much we get paid, depending on how it was framed and depending on what they knew about what it is we do. And the number one issue as it relates to this is that they think all we do is, and in fact, it made worse by us, because we'll help you find your dream home. And they say, not a problem. We're already finding it for ourselves, meaning that that's not valuable to them. And then the second one was, how do we get in? Who's going to open the door? And that was us. And that's what they saw us doing, was finding the property and getting them in the property. And the truth is, that's that's so minor to what we do as an industry. But that's their perspective as it relates to buyers and buy sides. And then the sellers think the same thing. sellers, when they say, so are you going to be here for the showings, or how come you haven't brought anything? Why do they ask those questions? Because they don't fully understand what we do and how we do what we do.
Thank you. A couple of other ones that came in here that we have kind of answered already. Yep, we answered that one live. But the question was, this is a good question, and I appreciate the question. What would be the benefit of leaving NAR? I think that's an excellent question. If we were to offer a non-realtor firm, we again would be wanting to do the best that we can do to serve you. So I'm not a NAR apologist. I agree with what Mr. Hall said earlier, that GAR is in our local boards is where we get our most value, in my opinion. And so really, I don't know necessarily a benefit of leaving NAR, but just to give another option. Do you have anything to add on that, Mark?
People don't like them. And I'm not talking about the general public, because they didn't know much about NAR until this and all the press that's come out after last Friday. But here locally, why did Atlanta Communities and why did, prior to that, Remax Communities be a part of NAR? Well, we really weren't necessarily a part of NAR. That was because we were members of the local association or board. And by virtue of that, we were a member of GAR, which again provides tons of value, I think, to us. And then by virtue of that, because the membership flows upward, we were a member of NAR.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for many people, they don't want to pay the money. That'd be one thing. And for other people, they don't see the value. You know what? Behind the scenes, NAR has historically been, historic would be the word, the key word there, the number one, the largest lobby in the United States, in Washington, D.C., promoting home ownership and promoting the real estate industry. Some of that has eroded over the years, probably within the last 5 years or so. And again, I think some of that can be attributed to the death of Johnny Isaacson. Nobody talks about that, but I really think that we had a great champion who was very good at consensus building and everything, and reached across both sides of the aisle and brought people together, as brokers often do, and as real estate people always do, because you got to get the two parties together, which is what he did and did so successfully. But since he passed away, we really don't have that kind of champion or leadership in Washington. And I think that's part of it.
And one thing that I will add to that, that you didn't mention about Mr. Isaacson, is that he was a realtor.
Well, yeah, he was.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Northside Realty.
Northside Realty. He was, we as Atlanta Communities, and thanks to Judson's leadership, we have been compared to Northside Realty, which was one of the homegrown firms. Anytime somebody makes that comparison to Northside Realty, I always feel good about it, because they were a great organization until he decided to go to Washington, D.C. to represent this great state of Georgia.
I'm smiling here because somebody in the Q&A, won't call out my name, but somebody asked me who's going to be the Vikings starting quarterback in 2024. Mr. Gentz, thank you for putting a smile on my face as I'm trying to keep my composure and read through all these serious questions. The question was posed, what is a non-realtor firm? That would mean a non-realtor firm would be a firm that we would potentially, again, we have not made a decision, but you look at some of the other firms in the Atlanta area where if you go to join that brokerage firm, they give you a realtor firm option and a non-realtor firm option. And if you want to be a realtor, you're going to hang your license with this firm number. If you do not want to be a realtor, you're going to hang your license with that firm number. And that would mean that you would not have to pay the realtor dues. And so that's the answer on that one.
Yeah, and to that, I think it's appropriate, although, again, I could be tarred and feathered any minute now. But neither one of those two options is going to help you articulate your worth to buyers and to sellers. So that's really not the focus here. The focus for us should be, how do we get better at what we do, and how do we have better and substantive conversations with people, because the term keeps coming up and show our value. And I think that we need to flip that on its head and say, show our worth. You know what you're worth, and you need to show your worth. They will either put value on it or not put value on it. The consumers. You need to figure out what your worth is. And I can tell you, I've used this one before. Sully Sullivan flew those airplanes, first in the Air Force and then commercially, and he proved his value the day he landed in the Hudson because of all those years of experience. That's exactly what you want to think about, is what worth do you bring to a transaction on the buy side and on the sell side, and what all do you do? And that's the message you need to articulate, is that, you know what, my job starts after the house is found and after the door is unlocked, not before, although that is part of it, but that's a minimal part of it. It's, do you know what setbacks are? Do you know how frequently a septic tank should be pumped? Do you understand what the difference is between this siding and this siding? All the things that we know that are, again, prove our worth. Our negotiation, our communication skills, our quite frankly, the vendors and the contractors and the people we know, all those things are valuable, in my opinion, but they also are worth something.
Agree wholeheartedly. The next question we have here, it says, I was asking if you can still disclose cooperating commission on FMLS. As of now, yes. As of now, we can. These changes aren't set to go into effect until mid-July, according to the proposed settlement. So as of right now, and through mid-July, until we get a further update and the court approves this proposed settlement, we're going to be business as usual. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct. And to that, remember who's going to be calling those shots. Unfortunately, I hate to disappoint you as listing agents, but the people that are going to be calling those shots about whether you, up until any change might happen, will be the seller. It's going to be the seller.
Yes, sir.
Let's not forget the consumer as we try to figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to do what we do and how we are going to be able to do what we need to do. We need to also consider the buyer and the seller in part of that equation, because they're the ones that are going to drive it, probably as they have been all along, but even more so now.
Here's a good question, and it kind of brings us back to the settlement fact sheet, and said the question is just a little vague, and it says, what about commission rates? NAR has never set a commission rate. The Georgia Association of Realtors has never set a commission rate. Atlantic Communities has never set a commission rate. That is something that you discuss with your sellers and your buyers, depending on which side that you're representing. So no commission rates have ever been standard. And so that's that conversation that you'll be having with the seller and the buyer.
First with yourself.
There we go. First with yourself.
What am I worth, and what do I bring to the table, and how much do I want to do? And the way I've been describing how to do that is, you figure out what you want your annual income is, and then you figure out what your average needs to be on all transactions you might do over the year. And on some you might make more and some you might make less, but you got to figure out what you're willing to do as it relates to representing buyers, or as it relates to representing sellers, or as it relates to representing both. That's the real thing. It's not what the industry will do, it's what you will do. Because I can tell you again, which is something that, you know what, we don't always talk about, but they hire you as an individual. They hire you as an individual. Yes, they get the full backing of Atlanta Communities Real Estate Brokerage LLC, but they're hiring you because of you.
Well said. Well said. We had two questions come in regarding who's going to receive the $418 million other than the 50% that the attorneys are going to take, is how it was posed in here. And I believe that's still going to be left to the court to decide, but it would be on behalf of all of the plaintiffs, because they were seeking class action status. So they were talking about all home sellers in the last 4 years. So that's my understanding of reading the settlement. But yes, the attorneys are going to get a nice chunk of that, I'm sure.
Well, and so I had the displeasure, because I can't think of any other way to call it. One of your Atlanta Communities realtors or associate brokers sent me a link to something called The Daily, which is from the New York Times, and it was a podcast featuring the reporter who broke this story last week, who has been on NAR's case for months about any number of things. And I had the displeasure of listening to the full 30-minute podcast this morning. And based on what was said in there, which I'm sure is also part of the 108, is that money gets paid into a settlement pool, like anything, like LP siding or any of those things. And then you get a postcard in the mail, says if you bought or sold a house in this, you may be entitled to compensation. And then you submit the paperwork, and then they, through some formula, determine that you're going to get your $37.37, and they mail you a check at some point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a good question that came in, and these are all great questions. So I don't mean to necessarily just single this one out, but can a listing agent display a way to redirect buyer's agent to a different site off of the MLS that will display the buyer's agent offer of compensation, such as a unique URL, link in private remarks, click here for more property info. And so again, as Michelle Davis pointed out, through KV Core in the listings there, you can have the buyer broker compensation. I know in the Georgia MLS, they have an external reference field that allows you to display a separate URL. So you could take your web address or URL from your listing in KV Core and put that into the Georgia MLS. Oh, well, now that I think about that, no, it wouldn't. No offers of compensation on the MLS.
So the answer is we don't know.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, what you could do is you could have that ready to go. You could have your listing link ready to go that you could send over. Because if that would be, I'm not sure. That would be.
But again, I want to make sure that I'm making this point, because I can tell that it's not necessarily resonating through everybody who might be on the call, and that is future sellers may or may not want to offer compensation. They may consider compensation, but they may not want to offer compensation. It appears as if everybody thinks that every seller that you're going to do business with in the future is going to offer buy-side compensation. And I am not so sure that that's going to be the case. Doesn't mean they won't entertain it. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to push for it. It just, you're worried about how you're going to display it, and I'm worried about if they're going to pay it.
Right.
Those are not the same thing. They're similar, but they're not the same thing.
Okay, let's see. Scrolling down the list here, piling up.
All right, so while you're doing that, I'm going to talk about something that we are going to do going forward, probably after most Metro Atlanta school systems have spring break, which is, I believe, set to be the first week of April. And after that, we are going to go back to buyer and seller conversations, touring the offices again, with the help of your broker in your office or brokers in your office, maybe even brokers from across the company at any given time. And we're going to have conversations where we role play about how to have the conversations with both buyers and sellers. And the reason that we think that that's important is, again, we need to think about service and what we do as opposed to the focus being on how we get paid or what we get paid. And I realize, just like it is for me and my family, what we get paid and how we get paid is a big part of what our lives are about, because that money and that compensation funds our lives. So anything that we want to do, we need the funds in our family to be able to do that. But again, if we focus on the service aspect and what we bring to the table and what we're worth, I believe that the public will pay us. They want to pay us, and people make the difference.
Yes, they do.
People make the difference. We saw that with, if you think about the iBuyer crowd buying all those properties and all, and you think about how many people could cross the thresholds of any one of those houses because they could get a code from one of the owners of those properties and tour the property themselves. And yet most of those properties were sold again after they were bought by the iBuyer crowd to people who were represented by real estate professionals. So I want to say it's as high as somewhere between 80 and 90% of transactions in the United States, maybe because the seller paid the fees that we got or it came from the transaction. But those people used us because they thought we were important and valuable to the transaction. They had an opportunity to go see houses without us, and they didn't do it. Mm-hmm. And they didn't buy directly from the listing agent. Will that change? For some people out there in the marketplace, it's not changing. They don't like us and haven't used us for years.
Sure.
I suggest not doing business with those people because they don't like us.
Well, right along those lines, we had a question that came in that said, can we turn down listings if they won't offer buyer agent commission? Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, you get to choose who you work with on the sell side and the buy side. Now, again, it goes back to having that conversation with the seller about the potential ramifications of not offering that buyer broker compensation. And
you can pull it out. I mean, I know most people probably know this because I say it all the time. I'm not a numbers person. I'm not a stats guy. I'm not any of those things, right? But there are value to being able to say, well, in this market, in the last 30 days, these people have offered buy-side compensation and their time on market was X. In other words, you let the facts speak for themselves. And that case can be easily made more than likely because you'll have all the data available to make that case. And it'll be something that we haven't really necessarily considered as part of what we do with sellers on listing presentations. But you can say, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I hear what you're saying about not wanting to offer it. But if you look at the stats in your school district or whatever, or your price point or however you do it, 27% offered no buy-side compensation and they were on the market 30 days longer. You're going to be able to, again, articulate the worth, not the value, the worth of offering buy-side compensation potentially to sellers because you're going to have the data to back you up.
Michelle Davis just sent, and thank you, Michelle, sent over a little screenshot of it. Looks like a Zoom that she was on or a training that she was on. And it was a poll, and this was through Keeping Current Matters. And it says, which of the following statements do you agree with most? When you buy a home, you should definitely have someone who represents your interest during the whole process. Or B, buying a home is something you can do mostly on your own, perhaps with just a lawyer to help with the paperwork. 76% of those respondents, and I do not know how many they surveyed, 76% said that you should definitely have somebody represent your interest during that whole process. All right.
If there are self-driving cars, I'm going to drive still. I'm not going to get in a car and let it drive itself. Sorry, not going to do it. My wife and I had this conversation about quite frankly, my accountant, and my wife was unaware of what the fee was because uh, it's been the same roughly for the last 5 years, and she just didn't know what we paid. And I said, but if it was more than that, we would have paid it anyway because he's our accountant. And I think about the plumber that I use. He's my plumber, and my painter. He's my painter. And I don't ask them what they charge. I hire them to do the job. And I think that that's also really prevalent in this is again, from my point of view, it's about relationships and about treating people that you want to do business with the way that you want to be treated if somebody's doing business with you, and having those conversations. I don't think anything, I'm not sure that this is going to change anything other than how we talk about it and how we present about it. Are there going to be some people that don't want to pay, and then we have a decision to make whether we're going to take that listing or not take that listing? Sure, I do. And to that, I want to make sure that after you talked about that earlier, that we don't ostracize or pick on people that take listings where the seller is not paying compensation to the buy side, because we already had a couple of instances of that on rocks, and it serves no purpose. Because interestingly enough, if you needed to take a listing that you knew was a good listing but the seller's not paying, are you not going to take that listing because the seller's not paying? You know what? If I need to feed my family, I'm taking the listing.
Yes, sir.
I may not like it, but I'm going to take it.
Question came in regarding, can we be members of GAR and not NAR? And the way the current structure is, I do not believe that is a possibility. So when we join our local board, whether it's Atlanta, Cobb, Paulding, Cherokee, you pay your local dues. There's three things that are broken down in your annual payment. You're paying local dues, state dues, and National Association dues. So to the best of my knowledge at this time, there's not going to be a way to just be a member of your local board and GAR. That is to the best of my knowledge.
Right. And it could change. Or it could not.
Yep. Let's see. A similar question came in regarding, so do we continue to enter new listings with the cooperating commission in the meantime? Most definitely. We've touched on that, I think, once or twice, but thank you for asking that. Yes, until this proposed settlement is finalized and the MLSs have made their changes, we can continue to operate as normal. All right. Does NAR have the funds to pay the damages? That's a good question. And then the next question right after that, what if NAR were to go bankrupt because of this? NAR does seem to have the funds to pay this. They're paying it over 4 years, and it breaks down those 4 payments in the settlement agreement. I didn't think anybody would be real interested to hear those specific numbers, so unfortunately I did not jot them down on my little note sheet that I've got over on my second screen. And to follow up there, what if we're NAR to go bankrupt? One of the big reasons that NAR entered into this proposed settlement is that they did not want to go bankrupt. If they were to continue, if they were going to appeal the decision in the Missouri case, they would have had to post a $5.4 billion bond to go ahead and appeal that, because that's what the potential treble damages were worth to the plaintiffs in that case. So they were going to have to post over a $5 billion bond if they wanted to appeal. And if they had to do that, that would have bankrupted NAR. And that was in, they've done the current president, Kevin Sears, has put out a few videos, and you'll see those again on facts.realtor. And he addressed that one in his video yesterday to everybody. All right. So
and one of the things they mentioned in the daily, that podcast that I listened to, was talking about how that works. So they pay in a certain amount within X number of days after the settlement is agreed to, and then within the first year they have to make another payment, and then they pay the balance of it over the 4 years, and then that creates part of the pool that is coming from any number of sources, including the companies that settled. All of that money goes into the pool. And I'm sure the upfront payments are enough to probably cover attorney's fees. Oh, did I say that? Oh, yeah, I did. Yeah. They get paid first.
Yes, sir. All right. So another one that came through here for unrepresented buyers wanting to see a house, can we charge a showing fee? And if so, can we accept that payment through Venmo or the Cash App or something of that nature? The answer to that is, well, can you charge a fee for what you do? Sure. But you have to, that any payment needs to go through the brokerage. You cannot accept any funds from a customer or a client outside of the brokerage, and that is in license law. Next one that came through, let's see here. As a listing agent, if an unrepresented buyer wants to view the listing due to not wanting to pay a buyer's agent or inability to afford a buyer's agent, how will that process change, or will it? I don't necessarily think that process would change. You would want to, we dual agency is not something that we typically want you to be doing. So you would work with that buyer as a customer when you fill out that agreement with them, work with them as a customer and not a client. Do you have anything to add on that, Mark?
Just that, remember, if you're the listing agent, the seller is the one that's agreed to pay you whatever they've agreed to pay you. And in general, it has nothing to do with whether there is somebody, unless you've stipulated in the agreement, it has nothing to do with whether or not the buy side is represented or not represented. So again, I would direct you back to whatever your agreement is with the seller. The seller probably wants you, which again is conversational, but wants you to show anybody that's either interested and qualified or whatever parameters you and the seller set up to show that buyer. I don't think that's any different than it's been.
Mm-hmm. A comment came in with the proposed settlement. Am I understanding correctly that this removes any risk of personal lawsuits against realtors on past transactions? To the best of our understanding, this proposed settlement, if it is approved, will release more than 1 million realtors from any potential lawsuits on past transactions. Anything different?
That's actually a great question. And I don't think that's ever been on the table because again, so on the daily, when I listen to that podcast, and I hate to keep bringing that up because I hate to give her that much credit, but on there, she talked about 5 average sellers in Missouri sought out this attorney. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a great narrative. Yeah. So people are not coming after individuals, or at least not at this point, and nor do I think they're going to. They would have already. So this is an interesting thing, and I've made this point before. And again, I'm going to encourage any and all of you to come to the various enhancing buyer seller conversations and the workshops we'll have as related to that, and so that we can talk and role play about what we'll say to buyers and what we'll play to sellers coming up in the month of April. But this is an important part. Those people, I just. That narrative is not necessarily true. I just don't think nobody has called your brokers in your offices to complain about what they agreed to pay listing agents who then in turn are going to share it with buyers. And I don't believe it happened in Missouri either. Because it said in the podcast, it said, well, they signed agreements, but they didn't know what it said. And in one case, they thought they were paying 5.5, but it was actually 6. Okay. I'm sorry. We can't protect the public. They're anyway, I won't go there.
All right. Next comment that came in, is it possible to have a photo uploaded as a second photo and that photo shows 3% or 2 per 5 or whatever X percent? So when the buyers look at it, they see it. No, you are not going to be able to do that. Much like the MLSs have their rules regarding photos. They have compliance departments that run through those photos. So, one that comes to my mind is that you cannot have a picture of your yard sign in the photos. right? So when you're taking a picture of the front of the house and your signs in the yard, they will contact you to remove that. So very creative. I appreciate that, but no offers of compensation on the MLS once this proposed settlement is likely approved. Let's see. Rolling through here. Some of the questions are great that you're putting in here, ladies and gentlemen. The ones that we're not able to get to, please reach out to your home office brokers or contact Mark or myself as well. We are glad to try and help answer some of those really specific questions that you have here. We're not going to be able to get to them all. I've got over 100 questions, and we've got 6 minutes left on our webinar here today. And Mark and I talked about this. As Mark said, we're going to be going back around, making the rounds at all the offices and having these conversations again. And we may do another webinar like this again. So we are here to answer your questions, but unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of the ones that you put in here today.
One of the questions that has been posed to me is, I want to say that this is maybe in the proposed settlement, but you may recall better than I do on this particular point, and that is that whatever the written agreement is with the buyer, if you agree to X, that it prohibits you from taking more than X if more than X is offered. And that's one of the things where, for instance, if I'm working with a buyer and the buyer wants to negotiate what I get paid and I agree to something, I'm just throwing numbers out here, so don't shoot me. I'm just the piano player. I'm not involved in the fray. If, for instance, I put 2% in there, and then they happen to pick a house where the seller is paying 3%, will I, as the buyer's agent, be able to take 3% instead of the 2% we agreed to? And overall, I'm not sure how that will go, but I suspect that Seth Weissman et al. And the Forms Committee will address that in the buyer brokerage agreement, probably in mid-year, so that we get some clarity to that, because I believe that most buyers, if something was being offered more than we had agreed to, would want us to make the money, the extra money, just as if they could only pay what was less than we agreed to, and we allowed them to do that, they would want to do that. So I really think that that's something that's probably going to be addressed, and whether or not we should draft a special step, we're working on. I've got a couple of those sitting on my desk right now. For some reason, I have in the back of my mind that Seth Weissman has already addressed this somewhere, but that could be, I dreamed it and it's not really real, but we will be looking into that as we move forward in the process with the changes that are potentially coming down the pike.
Yes, sir. I had a comment come in that said, sounds like we all need to be more involved in NAR and GAR. And I would concur with that statement. The local boards, start with your local board. The local boards are always looking for, it's a volunteer position when you serve on one of the local boards or the state or the National Association. So by all means, get involved. Get involved. I really like that comment. Then there are 2 questions that came in after that. Well, one was a question and one was more of a comment. The question was, does NAR intend to raise our dues in order to pay this settlement? According to the proposed settlement and the fact sheet on facts.realtor, your dues are not going to change in 2024, is all that they said. So read into that what you will. And then the comment was, I'm sure the fees for agents for NAR are going to go up. And we don't have the answer to that question, but they're going to have to pay this somehow. Let's see what else we have. We've just got a couple of minutes left, Mark. So what I want to pivot to is back to our outline. What happens now? What happens now?
Well, again, I think I think there's tons of opportunity in all this madness. And that opportunity is to better articulate our worth to the American public and more specifically here to the Metro Atlanta and Georgia, North Georgia region where we do business, and to articulate our worth to those people by making sure that they understand what we really do bring to real estate transactions. And for most of us, I'm going to say 80% of the people we do business with know what that is. And they hire us because it's us. And by us, I mean you as an individual. And that's because they trust you, they value your knowledge, they value your experience, they value all the set of skills that you bring to a transaction in the real estate realm. And now is the time for us to double down on the customer service. We need to go back to the future when service was everything and we got paid accordingly. And now we need to go back and double down on what makes our service unique, which is our own individuality and our own individualness. And that's what we need to do.
I agree wholeheartedly. I had jotted down my notes to continue to have those meaningful conversations with your buyers and sellers. Discuss
Control what you can control. Be the best you can be. But it sounds like the Army. But I'm going to go with a few the proud, the Marines. But really, you want to be the best people in the marketplace, and the way you do that is enhancing your skill set and getting better at what it is you do, and understanding that your role in the American real estate environment is critical to the success of real estate in the United States. You matter.
Yes, sir.
In a big way.
All right, Mark, it's 11:30.
All right. Well, I appreciate you, Tony, for being here in the line of fire with me today. I hope everybody found this valuable. Again, I didn't think there was going to be anything earth shattering. If you loved it or hated it, send me a line either way. We're doing the best we can, and we want to get out here with you and let you know what we know and be out in front like we believe we should.
Yes, sir. And I appreciate you and your time and your expertise. We appreciate all of our brokers that are fielding questions and phone calls from all of our agents. And ladies and gentlemen, all of our realtors and associate brokers, we appreciate you being with Atlantic Communities. We appreciate you taking your time to be here with us today. We're going to continue the conversation, as we said, and we will continue to monitor this between Mark, myself, Judson, Robert, our entire executive team. We are going to be monitoring the situation, and we will continue to lead this organization a path forward as we all navigate through this interesting time in the real estate industry. So with that said, yep.
Right on.
Right on.
Right on. Right.
All right.
Concur.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mark. Have a wonderful day. And we look forward to seeing you and speaking with you again very soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you, Atlanta Communities. Bye-bye.